Hello and welcome to Niche References, where I yap about my niche interests so that I don't annoy my friends and family with them. My name is Chris, and today I'm once again going to be yapping about my favorite TV show, The Genius. Today we're going to be continuing my mini-series doing rankings of The Genius main matches and players, and today we're doing the ranking of the players of Season 3, Black Garnet. Like with the other seasons, my criteria for ranking the players is a lot looser than the main matches. I generally try to take into account and balance their gameplay, the entertainment value and character they bring to the show, and of course, my own personal bias. Because of course I do like certain players more than others, regardless of their gameplay. Before we jump into my ranking, I should also note that these rankings are based solely on this season, not on any previous or subsequent seasons that they played in. Enough preamble, we know what we're doing at this point, let's jump in. For the third time in a row, I'm starting my player ranking by saying that the person I've put in last place isn't my least favorite player of the season, but unfortunately I do think that Judy has to be last. The biggest thing in her favor is that she's got good instincts. She's not trying to win fruit stand, she's not trying to backstab, she's not trying to lead, she just wants a smooth path to safety, which I think is frequently the correct optimal play in The Genius. However, you probably shouldn't be running around telling everyone that. Those are inside thoughts. I'm also torn on her choice to change fruits. I like the idea of finding people you feel like you can trust and trying to match fruits with them, but not when you've already told other people that you want to change and work with them. And I also kind of wonder if changing fruits is always gonna upset someone, either people with your original fruit or people with your new fruit. I think it mostly should be used as an offensive move rather than defensive like she uses it here. Regardless, I think Judy is a player with decent ideas who just executed them very poorly. Her deathmatch showing wasn't terrible, she played well, but Ayoung got out ahead of her. And character-wise, she's unfortunately also pretty forgettable, so overall there's not that much to say about her. In second to last place is my actual least favorite player of the season, and I think we can probably all say it together: Lawyer Kang. Listen, I try to keep my commentary on these people to just things that happened on The Genius and not any sort of outside information. But when you introduce a player by telling me that he got into a scandal for making sexually derogatory statements toward female broadcasters, yeah, I already hate this man on first sight. And he doesn't do himself any favors here because, like Hwijong before him, he has a very aggro, intimidation-centric playstyle that I personally absolutely hate watching in The Genius. And once again, like Hwijong, he's actually pretty bad at The Genius because that playstyle is generally not well received in this environment. He completely botches the game for the criminal team in season 2. I know somewhere Yoo-hyun mentioned that they'd all previously discussed that the leader wouldn't go with them if they all went off together, and yet he went right with them. And when he does go to the death match, no one really wants to help him, and they only give him information because he intimidates them so much. And then episode 3 rolls around and at least half of them choose him as the last place pick and then subsequently force him to lose middle race. Or I guess technically win in this instance because he did place first. The Genius is a game that requires a decent level of social game, and he had absolutely none. I don't like his playstyle, and I think that he's objectively a bad player, so he lands as low as I feel I can put him. At number 11, I have put Sujin. Per usual with The Genius, we're talking about at least half of the women on the cast at the very bottom of the ranking. Don't you just love it here? Ultimately, I think I put her this low because I feel like she didn't add much to the season, whether that's of her own doing or the editor's doing. She comes in claiming to dislike Dongmin, but she almost immediately falls in line as one of his loyal soldiers and ultimately becomes early season fodder. She does seem like she's somewhat strategic and she's frequently in the middle of strategy, but it's hard to tell quite how much when it's so heavily filtered through the narrative from Dongmin's perspective and when she frequently just deferred to whatever his plan was. Personally, when I think of Soojin as a player, the first thing I think of is her mistake in the death match where she seemingly absent-mindedly bet on the wrong side of her card. Every time I watch it, it always seems like she's really serving face. So I wonder if she was just so preoccupied with keeping up her poker face and not giving anything away that she forgot what she was doing somehow. Maybe she was just overwhelmed and not thinking straight. I don't know. Either way, it's difficult to get a great read on her ability as a player, and she's not a player that I particularly enjoyed, so this is where she winds up. In 10th place, I have Jung-hoon because I see him in almost the exact same light as Soojin, but I gave him the edge because I think he's a lot more self-sufficient as a player and he lasts just a smidge longer. Like Soojin, he comes in with some sort of ambiguous beef with Dongmin, but never brings it up again. He's not quite as much of a Dongmin loyalist as Soojin, but he works with him a few times and ultimately seems to be more on his side than not. And to be honest, we don't really see that much of him except a couple of very clear strategic blunders. Those, of course, being how obvious he was as a criminal in Jury Game, and his Gyul Hop Black mission where he calls Gyul with so much time left over, and the hop that he missed was 1, 2, 3. Literally the first thing you should see on the board. Compared to Soojin, because I do see them as pretty tied on this list, he is a bit more of an independent player. Although that does lead to us seeing a bit less of him and also leads to him going to 2 death matches. He's also another player who's pretty under-edited, so we don't see a ton of him or get a great sense of what he is like as a strategist. As much as I love this season because of its strong narrative arc, some of these early season players did really disappear in the edit when they didn't play a part in that narrative. And I do think that he's probably the clearest example of that. Next up, moving a few places higher than he got last time, I have Huijong. Compared to Season 2, the Huijong we get this season is a lot gentler and softer. Season 2 Huijong was like the lion with his claws bared from the jump, but this season he's kind of more like a house cat who's been declawed. It's almost too big of a swing to the point that he kind of fades into the background. Most of the time he seems perfectly content to just play sidekick to Dongmin, which isn't a great place to be in this season thanks to all of his early season allies being cursed. That said, he does obviously play better in this season than he did in Season 2. He's much more agreeable, he plays nicely with others, and he does a much better job of trying to play safer instead of being out in front all the time. He also at one point makes a really funny comment where he says that it's dangerous to be playing out in front all the time like Dongmin is, which I think shows the clear difference in their genius abilities because one of them can get away with it and the other absolutely cannot. And yet, although he's playing a much more agreeable game, he only makes it 4 episodes in, because I think no matter how much he tries to be a team player, he's always going to be an easy target and does not necessarily have the social game to counterbalance that the way someone like Dongmin does. And although he's very smart and seems to be decent at strategy, he has a 0% win rate in death matches, so he can't really reliably save himself there either. Overall, he definitely has a better showing here than he had in Season 2, but it's still not a great one, and I still think that he had pretty much no win equity here. Rounding out my personal bottom half of this list is Kyung-hoon. I'm very begrudgingly placing him this high because of how big of an impact he made on the season as a character, as well as the fact that he was a much more out in front active player than pretty much anyone I've already listed. And I do usually prefer people who are really trying to win over people who are just along for the ride. To his benefit, I'll give him this: Kyung-hoon is a very unique player. I know he was heavily inspired by wanting to play like Sangmin. He wants to be the big character, he wants to make the big moves, he wants to play the genius and backstab along the way. And I absolutely respect that. However, his version of doing this is so erratic that he ends up being an easy target because people do not want to have to work around his chaos. And once again, he clearly does not have Sangmin's social game to be able to counterbalance that and keep people on his side. Except Ah-young, I guess. His move in Fruit Stand is such a fun, iconic moment, and it's honestly impressive that he managed to keep Ah-young as an ally after that, but he just immediately puts himself out there as a backstabby, untrustworthy player, and he was probably never going to recover from that. And as I mentioned in my main match rankings, his return near the end of the season is personally very frustrating to me. Overall, he's definitely a bit of a whirlwind this season, and that impact gets him to the upper half of my bottom half. So before moving on, I want to pause down here real quickly because I always enjoy when we get a season where all of the main characters make it to the end. In season 1, we got that when we got down to the final 4, but I think we actually get that here in season 3 at the top 7. I love all 7 of the players left on this list, and I really hate that I have to put one of them in 7th place. But alas, I have to choose a 7th place, and for that, I've gone with Yeonju. I hate this. I hate this so much. She does not deserve to be in 7th place. In many ways, I see her as similar to Eunji from season 1, except better socially integrated. What I mean by that is that similar to Eunji, on the surface, she can come off a little bit ditzy because we don't always see where her head is at strategically. And the times that we do, it's when she's confused by Sword and Shield or accidentally blabbing Dongmin's strategy to Yoo-hyun. But when you look a little bit deeper, I think you see a very consistent, loyal player who's socially very well integrated. Sure, she's definitely a very safe player. She's seemingly almost never playing to win, but rather playing for the team or playing to be safe. But because she's such a safe, consistent player, she frequently ends up being that person who gets a bonus Garnet in a main match. And she ends up being one of the Garnet leaders mid-season. For the majority of the season, she's someone who is never without allies. Someone always wants to bring her in or work with her, and although she's close with Yoo-hyun, she's also very easily able to switch over and work with Hyunmin and Dongmin. And also, she and Yeon-seung completely dominate middle race too with their friends from home. Admittedly, she is no strategic mastermind, and I don't think she has much win equity in any season of the Genius ever, but I think that being a loyal, steady player on the Genius can do absolute wonders for you, and it certainly gets her far in season 3. So for all of those reasons, she's handily in my top 7 of the players, but at the very bottom of it. In 6th place, I have Jongbum. Every season, we have that person that I wanted to see more from, and usually it's someone who's eliminated pretty early, but this time it's Jongbum. I find him very interesting this season because the big season-long narrative is really Hyunmin and Dongmin versus Yoo-hyun. And although Yoo-hyun and Jongbum are both very strategic and seem to work together just as much as Hyunmin and Dongmin, we're shown a lot less of their partnership and a lot less of Jongbum in particular. I mentioned in my main match ranking that I see him kind of in the same light as Yeonju, where he's just a loyal, steady player. He's a bit underhanded in jury game when forced to be, and he's the catalyst of icing out Hyunmin and Dongmin in Constellation Game. But for the vast majority of the season, he comes off as someone who's just solidly strategic and not particularly backstabby or schemy. He's definitely a team player with a capital T, and he's not someone who's going to betray that team once it's formed. Every time I rewatch this season, I always expect to see more of him because he is a strategist, and I group him in with people like Hyunmin and Yoo-hyun who do get a lot of screen time. In reality, though, he does come off like a much more active and strategic version of Yeonju, which is why they end up back to back on my list. He's not necessarily a super flashy character for the show, but I quite like him, and I do wish we would have seen more of him. Moving on to 5th place, I have Ah-young. Strategically, I'll admit this is probably a bit high for her. But as a character, she absolutely pops off the screen and is one of my personal favorites. She's not a brilliant strategist. She's usually not going to be the person coming up with a strategy, but she can absolutely execute a strategy, and she definitely held her own in the Black and White 2 deathmatch. Like with Yeonju, I think that her biggest strength is her social game. She's able to fluidly work with pretty much anyone in the cast, pivots when she needs to, and isn't someone who's going to be left out of an alliance. And like with Yeonju, she also makes the correct move to pivot and ice out Hyunmin and Dongmin in Constellation Game, and she stands firm on that even when it feels cutthroat and even when she's being intimidated by Dongmin. But let's be honest, her strategy is not the star of the show here. The real star of the show and the reason she's so high is her personality. She has such a fun, bold personality. She's so much fun to watch, and she's really funny, whether purposely or on accident. Whether she and Dealer Hong are laughing together in the dealer room or she's stumbling over her own feet, she always adds a layer of silliness. And one of my favorite things about the genius is its ability to seamlessly bounce between moments of serious strategy and goofy moments of levity. So that's something I really enjoy from her. Ultimately, while this may be very high for her strategically, she is one of my favorite people to watch on the season, and for that, I'm putting her at 5th place. At number 4, I have Hyun-sung. Obviously, the main storyline of this season is centered around Hyunmin and Dongmin, but I think that Hyun-sung has one of the most fun character arcs of the season. He starts out as someone who was seen as weak and frequently ended up as an easy target. He loses 2 main matches early on, but his ability to keep a cool head under pressure gets him through the death matches. As the season progresses, he seems to gain confidence in himself and grows into an underrated strategic threat with his famous steely mentality. He comes across as very kind and quiet, so I think a lot of people thought they could take advantage of him, but he refuses to be underestimated. In episode 5, Dongmin tries to convince him not to take Sujin to the deathmatch, and instead of being scared into submission, Hyun-sung takes the challenge head on and chooses her with the explicit purpose of not bending to the will of Dongmin. It's that kind of quiet strength that I think makes him so rootable. And by the late season, I think he pulls some pretty impressive moves. He's the one who convinces Jongbum to include him in the big alliance in Constellation game instead of going with Hyunmin and Dongmin. In Middle Race 2, although they stumble a bit at the end, his alliance with Yeonju out-strategizes the alliance made up of all the players who should be more strategically dominant on paper. I think his weak point is probably that he tends to find himself on the outs more often than not. He's not someone who tends to form solid, reliable alliances. But I think he's someone who learns to recognize his position in the game and figures out how to leverage that to his advantage. Despite being an oppositional force to Hyunmin and Dongmin, who are universal fan favorites, Hyun-sung is also universally beloved, and I think that that's a huge testament to how great he is both as a player and as a character. Speaking of an oppositional force to Dongmin and Hyunmin who's universally beloved, in 3rd place, I have Yoo-hyun. I can't help but feel so bad for Yoo-hyun because I think if he were on either season 1 or season 2, he would stand a really great chance of winning and probably would be my favorite player and possibly even my favorite character as well. But instead, he winds up here on season 3 with the most dominant alliance we've seen to this point, comprised of perhaps the 2 best genius players of all time. Bro was screwed from the start. I've also seen some outside media he's been in, and every time I really enjoy his snarky personality and dry sense of humor. He's definitely the type of person I always naturally gravitate toward and root for, so I'm very biased in his favor. I think he's also one of the best strategic minds we've ever seen on the show. He frequently executes strategies that in most other situations would likely get him the win, and he's almost always nipping at Hyunmin and Dongmin's heels in main matches. I still haven't attempted to begin a ranking of all the players, but he's easily in my top 10 and definitely a candidate for rounding out my top 5. He's excellent on paper, he's excellent in reality, and he's also just a personal fave. And yet he unfortunately has to wind up in 3rd place because he's simply just up against the best of the best. Honestly, I think his biggest flaw is simply that he butts heads too much with Dongmin, which means that they're going to be at odds with each other instead of working together. We see time and time again that he offers an olive branch to Dongmin, requests to work with him, and nearly every time, Dongmin shoots him down. Yoo-hyun is just too calculated, too willing to be entirely self-interested, and that is not someone Dongmin wants to work with. Yoo-hyun's clearly perfectly capable of playing a strong social game. He and Jongbum work together the whole season, he works closely with Yeonju, and seems to have decent working relationships with the rest of the cast. And he's the person who really rallies that ragtag team of misfit fruits together in episode 1. But he and Dongmin just simply cannot get on the same page. Overall, I think he's an excellent player all around, one of my personal favorites, but largely just gets screwed by being on a season with Hyunmin and Dongmin. Speaking of which, I've talked about them so much in this ranking already, we've finally made it to the top 2. We probably all already knew that this was going to be the top 2 because duh. But I'm gonna do something a little bit controversial because in second place, I've put Dongmin. Listen, I know I'm very biased, but I genuinely believe that all things considered, Hyunmin played the stronger game this season despite ultimately losing. I think that quite obviously, Dongmin is the main character of the season. This season, more than any other, has a very clear story, character arc, narrative, point of view, and this season is very heavily told from Dongmin's perspective. I think a really great example of this is Middle Race. He sets up the clear alliance and then feeds it to Sujin and Junghoon. When everyone is too kind to Lawyer Kang when they want to eliminate him, we hear Dongmin criticizing them. He's not a necessary component in any of these moments, and yet he's the one narrating them. We're seeing them from his perspective. Dongmin has a very straightforward style of play where you're either 100% devoted to him or you're absolute trash to him. And generally, I don't like when a player is that rigid and in a way domineering over the people they're working with. But it's a huge testament to Dongmin's social game that he's able to diffuse his very controlling playstyle by using his charisma and humor to keep his allies loyal to him without coming off as overly aggressive or intimidating. It's a very fine line to walk, and he usually does it very successfully. That said, I do think that being so out in front leads to his alliance getting targeted early on, and because of this, his weaker allies drop like flies while he remains. And because he's such a confident player, he's particularly prone to crashing out, which he does a couple of times this season. He ignores Hyunmin's strategy in Constellation Game, which allows the other players to implement that strategy to undercut them and use it against them. And then in Chain Auction, he completely forgets order of operations and screws himself over, sending himself to the deathmatch, which he nearly loses. There's no denying that he plays one of the strongest Genius games ever this season, but it's also one littered with allies he couldn't save and nearly game-ending mistakes that were entirely of his own making. So it's by no means a flawless game. And I say all of this about his gameplay without talking about how fun he is as a player. Personality-wise, he's like a much more nuanced version of Hongchul. Where Hongchul was always on 11, Dongmin has range. He'll crank it up to 20 in certain moments and it can feel utterly ridiculous. But he also frequently entirely turns it off and is very serious and calculated. It really humanizes him and makes him come across much less like someone putting on a persona, even when he is being really loud and really silly. He's an excellent personality and an excellent player, and probably most people's choice for first place on this list. But instead, in my own personal first place, I have put Hyunmin. I flagged up in my last player ranking that I generally prefer a lovable strategist over a crafty, bigger character. And in the moment, I was comparing Jinho and Sangmin, but I was ultimately looking forward to the Dongmin and Hyunmin comparison, because as I have already mentioned, Hyunmin is my favorite Genius player, full stop. And technically, I could put him in first place purely for that reason. It is my list after all. But I do genuinely believe that he played the best game this season. I can't claim that this is like the best season of the Genius anyone has ever played to this point, because that honor still belongs to Sangmin from last season. However, I do think that he has a really impressive number of main matches this season where he's able to execute absolute god-tier strategies. In Jury Game, he expertly gets the criminals to trust him and then swoops in and saves the civilian team. I'm on record saying that to this point I feel like this is the best single main match performance of anyone ever. Stormy Stock Market, he obtains all the information and then leverages it to get in the dealer room at perfect moments. Something that a lot of other players really overlooked and underestimated. Chain Auction, he creates a plan where his equation is always going to equal 10. Even Minor Game, where their strategy isn't foolproof, he forms an excellent strategy and is able to pull a clutch move exactly when he needs to. So frequently, he is just playing the genius on a totally different level from everyone else, and it is so cool to watch. And I also have to mention that although Sangmin played a very dominant game against the Season 2 cast, I feel like Hyunmin plays this really excellent game against a cast that is probably strategically the strongest cast we've seen to this point, which to me makes it all the more impressive. And on top of all of this, I don't think he really has a crash out the way that Dongmin does, because I'd argue that his 2 lowest points of the season weren't really his fault. Once again, please forgive my painful bias here, my rose-colored glasses are fully on. But in Constellation Game, he was the first one to mention the correct strategy and wanted to execute it, but got shut down by Dongmin, and then got shut out by everyone else in a way that he really had zero control over. And then in Doubting Yutnori, he gets paired with Chaos Kyunghoon, who refuses to act rationally at all. I'll admit, perhaps he could have played that better, but it really seemed like he was doing the absolute best he could with the very messy hand he was dealt. And also, although it rubbed Lawyer Kang the wrong way, and perhaps because it did, I always really liked the way that Hyunmin was willing to barter for favors. And as I mentioned earlier, he is in that sweet spot for me of lovable strategists, and although he's not the loudest person or the biggest personality in the room, I always found him very rootable and enjoy watching him maneuver the game, especially when he's doing something a little underhanded or sneaky. Overall, I just see him as someone who performed consistently well all season, and he's also my personal favorite, and therefore he gets first place on my list. So those are my rankings of the players of the Genius Season 3 Black Garnet. Next up, of course, will be the Season 4 main match ranking. You might have noticed that these past couple of rankings have taken a little bit longer to get out. Life is currently lifing. I've got a lot going on at the moment, and with how long it takes to rewatch an entire season, script, record, and edit, it just hasn't been feasible to keep up the pace of doing 2 a week. And I definitely want to make sure I take my time with Season 4 because I have a confession. I have only seen Grand Final once. One single time 8 years ago. It's definitely the season I'm least familiar with and least knowledgeable on, so I'm really excited to finally re-experience it, but it's also going to take me longer to formulate thoughts on everything and everyone. So you can probably expect 1 ranking a week for Grand Final, hopefully followed by some big picture rankings like all of the players and all of the seasons. Thank you in advance for your patience as I try to get through the last of these. And if you don't want to be patient, please at least be nice to me because my birthday's in a few days. And no, it's not lost on me that my favorite Genius player and I have almost the same birthday. We also aren't that far apart in age either. In fact, I do believe I will be posting this on Hyunmin's birthday, and it will be his 30th birthday. So happy birthday to Hyunmin, and I'm sure we all now feel very old because he was a mere 19 years old when he was on this season of The Genius. It's somehow been that long since Black Garnet aired. But I digress. If you enjoyed this ranking and want to be updated when the next ones drop, please go ahead and follow or subscribe on whatever platform you're currently listening on. As always, you can also follow my Instagram if you want to be kept up to date on upcoming content and my sporadic Genius updates as I rewatch. The link is down in the description. And as always, thank you so much for listening to me as I made some niche references.